Okay, so I think that we are ready to begin this conversation. Welcome everyone to today's conversation. It should be a fantastic one. I'm Noelle Carmen, and we are talking about how we as clinicians approach diversity and intersectionality in our practices. We have an incredible panel here today. Before I introduce them, let's just take care of some housekeeping. Please be aware that you will receive your CE information in an email by the end of business tomorrow. Okay, so onto our fantastic panel. I want to introduce Lindsay Wallach, the director and founder of Meraki Wellness and Healing. I would like to introduce Christian Vasquez. Am I saying that correctly? I hope I'm saying that
correctly. Christian Vasquez, yes.
Vasquez, excuse me. He is the clinical director for Meraki Wellness and Healing. He is an LMHC. Mar Trulio, she serves as a registered mental health counselor intern. And finally, Allison Moore, finally, but certainly not least, you specialize in substance use and are a lead therapist for Discovery Point Retreat. Welcome everybody to the conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, and to our audience, as always, I would like to invite you to ask all the questions, make all the comments. I will do my very best to address all of them. If I miss some of them, we will make sure in the email following that we will connect you with our speakers and also try to address any questions left unanswered. Okay, so all of that is done. The housekeeping's done, so let's get to the conversation. So Christian, I'd really like to start with you. And I'd like to get us all on the same page in terms of defining and describing what we mean when we are talking about approaching our practices from the standpoint of diversity, with multicultural populations, just intersectionally, just all of it. What does that mean?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here today, being part of this conversation. It's a conversation that at times can be very controversial, and we're like let's not talk about that, but we need to. It's a very important, topic discussion. And about the question you just asked, I'm going to relate it personally in my clinical experience. So I can also say that based on our modalities and theories and practices that we have learned in school. So I feel that we can always approach that and understand it, dissect it in our mind as far as like what we, take from it, what we understand, but to make it more diverse and feel for that multicultural background of how we engage, in diversity is basically that within the topic, that not one style of practice, can be applied to one specific demographic or population of clients. So we have to do our own research as well. And also with the experience gained over practicing in vivo with the clients, making sure that, we are, understanding and getting a feel for those interactions. I feel that the human connection goes above the, just one modality or one situational when it comes to diversity.
Mar, I'm going to throw this to you. And you and I had discussed offline about this being a process. So what does diversity mean for you in terms of your practice?
So we're working with Meraki Wellness and Healing with Lindsay and Christian. Thank you also for having me on today. Diversity is so much. Diversity is so broad. You can have diversity both in race and religion and culture, in ability or disability, in size and everything. It's just the difference, right? That's what diversity is. There is difference. I think to say that we are all the same, we don't see color, we don't see religion. I think that diminishes so much of the human experience, diminishes all of the human experience. And so just understanding that there is a difference, a strong difference between humans and between groups throughout, our practice, but throughout really humanity. It's a hard thing, I guess, to like boil down to like one very simple term, but that's kind of what it is. It's just this absolute human difference that we have.
So I think that you're saying something really interesting, profound, and maybe a little vulnerable. And Allison, I'm going to throw this to you, which is just to build upon that, looking at difference in terms of diversity. Isn't that a scary thing to say in a sense? Because in creating an other, we're looking at difference, and that could possibly create a lens that maybe isn't what we want clinically. Can you take that apart for us, unspool that a little bit?
Well, let me just say thank you as well for having me on. Being an African-American woman and then also being a Christian counselor, it is, some clients have a wall up when it comes to my spirituality alone, because of the environment I work in. I work in a treatment facility. So word gets around. The best advertisement is word of mouth. So clients already have a preconceived idea of me as a clinician before even meeting me. And so when they hear that I'm a Christian counselor or I have this spirituality, one of my clients said, I thought I was going to come into your office and see crosses hanging all over the walls, everywhere. So they already have a preconceived notion of me. And so yet diversity comes in all forms. And for me, it is my skin color and my religious beliefs. So I get it from even the client's point of view, being on the clinician side of it.
And that actually segues right perfectly into the next thing that I would like to bring up is intersection, because we're not all just one thing. I know I sound like a broken record. We're not all just one thing. We're not just queer. We're not just a person of color. You're a person of color who happens to also have, a religious identity. So Lindsay, I'm going to throw this at you in terms of intersection, because it's challenging enough, right? Just to say, to understand like the queer perspective, but take that and then add layers to it. This is a challenging job for we clinicians to make sure that we are able to address our clients in this way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We need to learn to think outside the box and just kind of understand that we're so complex as individuals. There's so many humans. So sometimes coming into, we also need to take that away from the session when we're coming in and trying to see that individual, not just for that one particular part of that.
The eggshell around the topic. Mar, what are your thoughts?
I think that we get defensive sometimes when we're told we have whatever set of privileges. Everybody comes with privilege. It just depends kind of where you are, what kind of privilege you have, how much oppression you face. It's, again, like Lindsay said, we're such complex creatures. And I think that sometimes when we're told that we are privileged, it strikes a chord, and it is, we get on the defensive. We don't want to talk about it because that word privilege has come to be so negative, at times. And so this conversation is hard to have because as clinicians, we believe we're doing good. That's the point. That's why we're here. We're here to do good, to help our clients, to put something good into this world. And so then being thrown kind of this little bit of a bomb saying like, well, actually though, like you're being kind of racist right now, or you're being sexist, or like your internal misogyny is showing. we're the good guys, you know, like we don't have any of that.
Do you
So
know who I am? I'm a
Right.
clinician.
I work with mental health. And so being thrown that ball is disarming, and we're not used to being disarmed. We're used to doing the disarming. So we need to check ourselves so much. And our role in a therapeutic relationship, it's a power, right? You're walking into a power situation where you hold the power and your client is the one who's being vulnerable with you. And so if you are not doing the research that you need to do, if you're not bettering yourself the way that you need to better yourself, looking at your prejudices, looking at your biases, calling yourself out consistently, which is so hard to do, you're not going to do good work. And that's the part that really, I think, a lot of clinicians struggle with. Consistently.
Ouch.
The piggyback Mara is saying, just the fact that we're having this discussion today, this is what we should be doing. We need to talk about it more. You know, everybody's very hush hush. Even us, we were right before this. We're like, oh my goodness, we're getting into some very, you know, iffy territory. But this right here, what we're doing, this is what we should start doing, talking about it, raising awareness about it. Let's get a little bit more comfortable with talking about these topics that a lot of people are not comfortable with.
Can I say something? Oh,
Sure. No, go right ahead.
so I want to jump in and just say the basis of it is fear. People are scared to talk about it, scared that I'm going to offend you. As a clinician, scared I'm going to lose your business, which, you know, is a part of our livelihood. Scared of how I'm going to be viewed by you, or what you're going to say to others. So it is fear. The basis of it is fear. And then we live in a cancel culture now.
Yes.
Everybody's canceled for everything they say, you know. So that's it. That's why we don't talk about things. And if we can have a conversation, just like Lindsay said, like we're doing right now, that can clear up a lot of preconceived ideas that we have about one another. And just be real about it. And it is okay to be offended. Sometimes it's okay. That's a growing thing, to be offended. Like, let me examine myself. Why am I offended by what she said or what he said? So just to be real, I think will end a lot of what is going on out here, not in just the clinical field, but the world itself, you know.
I love that, Allison, that, you know, you have to be your authentic self no matter what. And, you know, like you said, we are in this, you know, cancel culture that, you know, what we say, we have to, like, you know, tippy-toe around certain topics because we don't know what the outcome, what's going to happen after that. But if we're not authentic and we're not really showing our clients who we really are as clinicians, and aside from being the professional that we also are people. And that's the other aspect of it, that sometimes we're seen at this hierarchy that, well, that's my therapist. My therapist is just this person or this facade, but we don't really, you know, emphasize on how important it is to also be personable and show your true self. And when you show authenticity with your clients, that it will also, you know, follow back and reciprocity, and your client will be a little bit more open to the environment.
I love what you're saying about self-check. Like, this is like number one on the list is like, okay, clinician, I've just gotten upset or offended by me. Like, what is happening inside of me right now? And how would this conceivably affect, you know, my clinical work? If we get offended and shut down, what kind of an example are we being when we're trying to give the message to all of our clients? It's okay to mess up. It's okay to retract. It's okay to apologize. It's okay to reconfigure. Lindsay, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. If we're going to be preaching, we need to be, you know, following what we preach. So absolutely, ourselves, learning from ourselves. We're human at the end of the day. And like all of us, we have our pre-consistent, you know, notions about certain things. And lack of it, sometimes of education of different diverse cultures. So, you know, it's okay. It's okay for us to also feel this way, and for also what we're preaching and allowing our clients to feel comfortable, you know, coming out of their shell. It's okay for us to do the same as the clinicians, and, you know, just continue like always researching and always being open to learning more. Sometimes as clinicians, we just don't, you know, it's our way or the highway, or we don't want to open like other techniques. This is what's worked for me for so many years. But no, let's think outside the box. Let's see what's new. Let's be innovative. You know, let's see. We need to reach more people, and that's what we're here for, right? We can't limit ourselves, because then we're limiting access to services that people need. So we as clinicians need to really, you know, stand out and do what we're going out there and telling everybody else to do. We got to do some of ourselves.
So let's talk boots on the ground now. I would like to hear from each one of you about your specialty, the diverse populations, and I know it's vast, the diverse populations that you encounter and the things that work for you as clinicians. Like, what's your secret sauce, basically, in terms of meeting clients where they're at? Mara, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, at Meraki, very grateful enough to kind of run the gamut on diverse populations. We're a mental health clinic. We got everything. I know that you said that what we are used to working with, but I kind of want to turn that around and talk a little bit about the diverse populations that I'm working with currently that I don't have a ton of experience with, because I think that kind of lends to our conversation a little bit more. So right now I have a few clients that identify as queer, a few clients that identify as trans. Trans clients are not clients that I'm used to working with. I don't know many people who are trans. And so having them in my office, I have had to go down the list, even before I meet them, go down the list of what my preconceived notions are, go down the list of my biases, and make sure that I can go into that office to offer them as much help as I can without those biases, without those prejudices, right? And so when we get here for my client, it's going to sound strange, but my first session, I always give them an out. I do not want them to think that if they come into my office and they don't vibe with me and they don't like me, that, you know, they have to stick with me. I want to make sure that they know that if we don't work well together, if they don't like me, that's fine. I've been broken up with before. You can go find someone else. Like, I will help you find another counselor. I do not want to be the reason you don't come to counseling anymore. So being honest with yourself that it's not going to work out with every client. You also don't have to accept every single client that walks in through your door. You don't have to work with everybody if you do not believe that you can, right? And so giving my clients an out right away, I feel, to all, you know, walks of life, all cultures, all races, feels as though like, okay, I can sit here comfortably and like have this conversation with her. And if I don't want to be with her anymore, I can leave. I don't have to stick with her. She'll help me find someone else. So for me, that's worked really well the past few years. And I do it at the beginning of every single session that I have with not every single session, every single intake I have with every new client. And that's worked out really well for me.
So how do we find that line between who we should be working with and who we need to not necessarily break up with, but as you mentioned, help find the appropriate care? Christian, you want to tackle that?
Absolutely. And just to kind of piggyback a little bit of what Mar said, that, you know, I mean, they interview us as much as we do the same for the clients. So for me, it's always that pre-screening. And I have to kind of go back a little bit of origins too. So I'm from Miami, Florida. So given that, we know right off the back that, you know, we're going to have a high population of Latino clients from the Caribbean, Central America, South America, many Latinos, diverse backgrounds within the Latino community and within spirituality and et cetera. So pre-screenings for me it's key. It's essential. when it comes to the services that we are going to provide initially for a new client and ongoing as well. So for me, the assessment starts even before that, phone calls that we take, that we screen on a day-to-day basis, asking questions that are relevant to the clients that we're listening to, making sure that you have more than bilingual clinicians or staff answering and screening the phone calls. So I'm very big in understanding more the backgrounds of the Latino clients, that they do speak Spanish, hablamos español, that we're happy to hear from them, that we can relate to their experiences so that we can also break those barriers initially, that they know, because what Mar was mentioning about the queer community, LGBTQI, that, it takes more than just hanging a little pride flag on your office or practice to say that you're a competent, clinician. You have to also do the practice, do the training, do the research, engage in the community, get to know the people that you're providing and serving, so you have to be proactive constantly. And reality is, we cannot service every client or every potential client, that there is restrictions sometimes. Like, we have Creole speaking clients that call it at once. I mean, I don't speak Creole, but we can definitely, at that point, still doesn't mean that I'm going to hang up the phone call and say, well, I don't speak your language, blah, 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 all these other taboos within, communities. But we can definitely engage them, try to, provide support and services. If we can't do that for them, what's available, having community relationships with other practitioners that will be competent enough, and that's their niche or their professional, experiences dealing with a certain population. But I can tell you, with the Latino population that we deal with in Miami, I mean, just in general, that's a huge portion of how, even within Latino, myself being Latino, we have to be so diverse in our approaches, engaging every client that we service.
Let's talk about privilege versus oppression. Did you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we're
Well,
just
I'll keep it going.
Okay,
Sure.
sorry. Did I just
do it.
Okay, so let's talk about privilege versus oppression, in the sense that I think that we need to bring some clarity around that. We keep kind of throwing these words around. They are charged words. I think we can all agree, right? But also, again, in having a genuine conversation, we need to actually have the conversation. So what are your thoughts there?
I want to go first, because I'm very passionate about that too. And I want to mention about also Hispanics. I'm going to throw it out there because it's very controversial too. But there's a lot of white passing Latinos and clinicians also say they identified as white Latinos. So what happens there sometimes, that they don't profoundly engage with the clients, even though we're Latinos, that they're still kind of like that privilege of like, maybe, well, I don't think this is the right fit for me. And I get that in clinical supervision as well, when I meet with interns, that they might not say it in that way, but in my interpretation, that's the message that I'm getting. So we definitely need to know, and Mar mentioned this earlier as well. She said that we need to check ourselves initially. We really do need to know, what our counter transfers are, what are the messages that we're sending out, even as individually, and with the privilege that we feel, or entitlements that we might create in our own perceptions too. Because I think a lot of that has to do systematically, like how privileged we are. Well, if you're that privileged, share it with people that are vulnerable, that require other services, that need advocacy in the community. That's where I'll leave it at.
Okay. A large part of privilege in some ways is actually not being aware of the privilege that you're existing in. How do we get to that point as clinicians? Who wants to jump in and take that? I'm not even going to pick one of you for this. 1, 2, 3, go.
So give me the question again. What do you mean? How do we become aware of our privilege?
Exactly. That is, in essence, you can disagree with me, you're the expert. But in my understanding, part of existing in the privilege is not really being aware of the privilege. So how do we become aware of that?
I think a big part is listening. We're being told how, like, our privilege right now in the way that the world is right now. Privilege is being called out, as it should be, right? Because it's been hidden for so long. And so we're being called out now as white people, as white Latinx people, as, you know, straight people, as even within, you know, the Black community and colorism, even within the LGBTQ plus population, right? Trans people. So it's all being called out right now. All we have to do is listen and accept that this is a situation, and it's not bad. It's not a bad thing to be privileged. It just means that you got to where you are due to things that may have been beyond your control, but you still have them. And so now, once you know a little bit about that privilege that you hold, do the research. Google is free, right? Do the research. Find out what those privileges mean for you. Find out what you can do for your community, for other communities. Find out how to educate yourself better, especially as clinicians. We're not good clinicians if we're not continuously educating ourselves, right? We're going to do a lot of harm if we're not continuously checking ourselves, as we've been saying, and educating ourselves. But to answer your question, the first thing is listen to the people who are telling you that you are privileged. Like, they know.
Anybody else want to tackle that?
I think it's difficult. Oh, sorry, Lindsay.
Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead. I don't
okay.
think it's called privilege. It's a negative connotation right off the bat. If you come at me and you tell me I'm privileged, I'm gonna be like, oh, well, excuse me, do you know what I went? The first initial.
Yeah.
I think that to piggyback on some things that Mara said is providing education a little bit more, like understanding. It's going to be an uphill battle. Nobody wants to be called privileged. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't privilege nobody, because we all in some way feel we've had our own struggles. So, you know, it's going to be a battle. I think that we need to talk about it more. We need to take that negative connotation on the word privilege. In order to be able to do something, but it's not going to change if we continue having it be that negative. It won't. It'll be very difficult.
Because in some way, the word privilege creates a bad guy. Like, you're privileged, so you're the bad guy. Instead of talking about it in a more open sense. Allison?
I think that it's difficult as a clinician to point out to somebody that they're privileged. Because they're going to be like, well, how do you figure I'm privileged? I'm not privileged. But then I would be going off of my own experiences, my own life experiences. And so to tell you that you're privileged, yes, it can be offensive to them. And so then you shut off the client-clinician relationship right there. So I think it's very difficult. And then I was taught in school that as a therapist, you don't do a whole lot of self-disclosure. So it's not like I can sit up and go, well, girlfriend, let me tell you about what oppression looks like. You know, I can't do that. So that's unprofessional. So anyway, I think that it would be difficult. And I really don't have an answer as to how I can do that as a clinician, pointed out that you are privileged. And let me tell you how. You know,
let me ruin this clinical relationship right now.
Can I just mention one thing on Allison?
I want to go back and say really quickly, I never met, like, we're having that conversation with the client other than in moments where it could come up and it is important. Like, I'm not going to walk into a room with my client and be like, hey, you're like a privileged white person. You have no reason to be upset. No, I just met us as clinicians looking at our own privilege. I just wanted to put that out there. But I actually wanted to touch on something you said, Allison, which was like, you know, we do learn in therapy that self-disclosure, like, is a big no-no. Accepting gifts is a big no-no. Like, all these things, these are like therapy taboos. And in the world of doing multicultural work and being multiculturally competent, we need to challenge those things just a little bit, because there are so many cultures. They're not going to come in here and sit across from us and spill their guts and and not know anything about us, right? A lot of people expect some sort of a back and forth. Like, I'll share something if you share something. That's how I'm gonna like feel a little bit more comfortable with you. I had a client today who brought us all pastries because we discharged her today and she was excited about what we'd done for her. Like, am I gonna say no to this gift that she brought us? Oh, they were delicious. Am I gonna say no to this gift because in school I learned that like we don't accept gifts? I can't. Like, this is like a thank you. In her culture, this is important. Sharing food is important. So I think also challenging those things a little bit. You know, we walk such a fine line in our conversations and in our sessions between what is right, what is wrong. There's a lot of gray in there, right? So to the best of your abilities, if this is going to better a relationship between you and this client, maybe we need to challenge a few of those taboos a little bit more. Because I remember in therapy school and it was just all like, you need to be completely stoic, no advice, just say yes or no, or how do you feel about that? And that's about it. Like, there's nothing else that's going on there. And so I think challenging that a little bit while we're talking about like, multicultural competence is important.
Anyone else want to jump in? Because all of this is material to mental health. And so I would like to connect the idea of privilege and oppression with what it is we do, which is, you know, operate within the mental health world. So what can we talk about how mental health is affected in a unique way by individuals who experience oppression versus privilege? Anyone want to? I dare you to answer that one.
Oh
Anyone?
boy, where do we start? I mean,
Yeah.
I can tell you that for one particular client comes to mind, and I'm actually, with the questions that you're providing us as well, kind of relating in vivo also some of our experiences with, you know, our clients, which, you know, that's the whole point here in general, and having better practices as clinicians. That, you know, we recently had a client from Africa that lives in Miami. So for me initially, I had to also check myself because I'm like, okay, we're in Miami. This is one of the few cases for me in Meraki Wellness and Healing that, you know, is from Africa. They spoke Spanish. But you can tell initially that I was already feeling some type of way, like insecure, like how fear, like Allison mentioned as well, fearful of, you know, well, what's gonna happen? You know what I mean? Of we're gonna connect with this client, all these other issues and situations. But, you know, the client came in again, you know, specifying that, keeping in mind who's in front of me, showing them positive regard, being open with them, and providing them, you know, the resources just like any of our other clients, keeping in mind that, you know, I do see you, I do see who you are as a person, you know, as a person of African descent, as a person that's now facing, you know, real issues right now and wanting to get services. So it took a bit of time, but I definitely take it back to just having and trusting yourself as a person first, and what's going to be the next step. How are you going to approach, you know, this person that is of complete background and personal beliefs, and how you're going to be able to provide services or at least support in that initial meet and greet, breaking the ice with the person. So I always take it back as a practical technique, you know, be open, be yourself, and then let yourself guide you as well of how you're going to approach, you know, that person. And I think that even we're human beings, we're going to make mistakes, and if we do, that it's not the end there, that we can overcome situations. We don't always have to be perfect, or how Mar was mentioning that in school we're taught to say yes or no, or, you know, clarify certain things. But again, we go back to different modalities, different practices, different theories, that it's not just one, you know, area of clinical practice for each individual. We need to focus on the bigger spectrum of how we can get in tune. And yes, theory is important, and yes, how we practice clinically is very important, so we can give significant, you know, support to our clients. But at the same time, it comes to that personal breaking the ice with the person.
To add to the whole mental health and how it is, just to, emphasize also that the Hispanic community, Latinx community, there's just as much vulnerability to mental illness as there is to the rest of the population. Mental Health America, which is a great resource for us as clinicians, they have a lot of facts on there. They're constantly doing a lot of surveys and whatnot. I believe they had mentioned that I think approximately only 33% of the Hispanic culture actually gets any sort of treatment for mental illness. And I believe compared to the average in the United States, it was 43% that actually, to compare. And the reason is there's a lot of barriers for that community in itself. So when it comes to mental health, stigmas is obviously the first one there. In our Spanish culture, you don't talk about mental health. There is no mental illness. We're brought up like that since we're little, since we're children. And then we go on to a bunch of other, we can go on a detailed list of all the barriers, language in itself. The resources are not getting to these communities. There's a lack of resources for our Haitian community here in Miami. Even for our Hispanic community down in Homestead, we have a big population that they don't have access to information in their language. So they don't even know. There's no education. So how can they even know what mental health is if they've never been taught about it? And then you add on the stigmas for our culture and a bunch of other, there's stuff in our policies. The list goes on. So when it comes to mental health, there's a big disparity on these populations not getting access to treatment.
It's the same for African Americans. It's the same thing. You're looked at as, you must be crazy, to even think about getting some help, and you have a mental health issue. Parents don't want to believe that their child is suffering in that area. And then we're taught in my culture, get you some Jesus and you'll be okay.
Yeah.
And yes, you can do that. And I agree with that, being a Christian counselor, but then how do you apply it? What's the practical application? Like, what do I do when I'm feeling depressed? What do I do when I have a lot of anxiety? Yes, I can pray, and that takes care of the spiritual end, but what about the practical, everyday living end of it? And so that's what I think that my people are missing, that it's okay that you struggle, and it's okay to get help, and it's also okay to pray and get you some Jesus.
We just had a question come in that I think is really excellent. It's a lot of words, so bear with me here. Can you speak to white therapists who encounter clients who casually make overtly racist comments? As our white awareness grows about our own histories and roles in perpetuating racist, homophobic, etc. cultures, it seems only right that we also help our often white clients to also recognize their own missteps. But that might probably not be their presenting goals. So that's a really good question, because it incorporates education, yet also keeping your own space as a therapist. And like we had talked about before, hey, you're kind of a racist. Like, you can't do that. So how do we approach this? I know this is a common thing clinicians run into.
I think you can just start off by and correct me, guys, you guys do more direct care than I do, but I just I understand and I hear what you're coming from, and probably that's what your understanding of that is. And I would just kind of casually incorporate a little bit of just, without making them feel uncomfortable about their comments. It's probably just lack of knowledge. That's what they've been taught or heard. And so it's common that it's going to come out in conversation. And that just comes out with anybody who makes a racist comment, someone, just casually like, okay, I see what you're saying. However, and then you can go off on that, and I'll let you guys piggyback on that. Guys.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sorry,
guys.
go ahead.
No, go.
I was going to say, yeah, I try to just create an atmosphere of comfort just by the smile on my face or you know, just how I sit in my chair. And so that they can feel like that they can ask a question if it has to do with race, sex, whatever. That's what I try to create. But, you know, of course, it's up to them if they feel comfortable enough. Probably not at the initial meeting, but I think as they get to know me, because I deal with residential clients, so they're here all the time, every day. So I think that once they get to know me, they are more comfortable with asking. And then even my colleagues that are white or of other races have been able to sit in there. I've been able to sit in their office and they ask me different things about my culture, and the way I respond, they are able to ask even more questions. They feel more comfortable. So if I do that with my clients, I think that helps them to learn as well as my colleagues. You know, and also dealing with a lot of African Americans that come through DPR, it is definitely, I could deal with them and have great, you know, client clinician relationships and get past some barriers and all of that. But what is that doing for my colleagues who don't really deal with a lot of African American clients? I want them to be well-rounded as I will need to be. So I don't want to necessarily take on all of the African American clients that comes through, because I think that we all need to learn about each other's culture and how to deal with someone's attitude or their point of view of things.
Anyone want to add to that?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it has to do with, you know, getting to know people, you know, understanding their points of views so that you can also learn from them and vice versa. So if there's racist or racism behind, you know, the comments behind what they're, I mean, who is to know? We're getting into their world, and that's why, you know, they don't realize that when they come into therapy, that might be an objective to work on, because it is affecting them. So at a deeper level, you know, what's the real message? What are we really hearing from our clients by making those comments or those negative comments about a certain race? But how is that deeply affecting them as well? And coming from a place of showing open-mindedness and able to speak again, since we're creating this environment that, you know, at times for us clinicians it's difficult to talk about, then we also have to practice what we preach and find areas where we can also integrate those open discussions. And, you know, how Allison mentioned, once we're in that setting, you know, I don't know if that's a conversation that we would have initially at an intake, you know, assessment, but we can definitely have, if that's a repeated theme, as I like to call them as well, something that keeps coming up, and again, adding layers and affecting their mood, their behavior, and how they're also interacting with other people. How is that, you know, affecting, you know, day-to-day interpersonal relationships or their environment? Are they isolating because they're really not understanding of other cultures as well? So just kind of throwing ideas in there as well, and just keeping an open mind. I always say, you know, motivational interviewing, something that I have seen it as well, and have done my own research with the clients that I work with, that it works all across the board. And, you know, you can roll with resistance, get to know that ambivalence that exists. You know, I'm hearing what you're saying, but on this end, you know, this is real, the message that I am actually getting. So we're challenging some of those distortions as well.
Mar, did you want to add? We have another kind of comment that I think is really interesting, but I didn't want to cut you off if you were going to add to that.
No, it's okay. We can move on.
Okay. So here's a comment. So I'm just going to read this. I have seen firsthand how the mental health stigma in the Hispanic community has prevented individuals who have suffered great trauma from seeking out help. I tried to help a minor child who was a victim of a hostage and witnessed a tragic shooting. A year prior, he witnessed another shooting in his family. His mother refused to engage him in services, and this actually segues right back into, I wanted to slow that stigma conversation, which we had kind of touched on, because that is a huge barrier for people. Obviously, this person's mother did not want to engage in services. I'd be curious to understand why. What are your thoughts?
There's a lot of stigma in the Latinx community with mental health. Just like Allison said, there's a lot of like, let's throw Jesus on it and then pray on it and you're good to go. Not knowing that there is a lot of extra work that you could be doing. I think it also depends on how we pose our services. Like we need to meet our clients where they're at. Are we going into this conversation with this mom? And who wrote this comment? Emily, not saying you did something like this. This is just like an example, but are we going into this conversation with mom being like, you know, he had a lot of trauma. He needs to see a specialist to help him understand what he went through. Are those the kind of words we're using? Because those are big words, right? Trauma, specialists, like moms don't, a lot of moms, right? Not even just in the Latinx community, but a lot of moms don't want to like have their kids involved in this. They just want them to forget and that's it, right? So how are we posing this situation? How are we posing the help? Like, hey, it's just someone your son can talk to about what he saw, and just, you know, we can talk about it a little bit, make sure he's okay, and then he can move on. So just kind of bringing that down to the space where your clients are at. You have to meet them where they're at. Anything that's too verbose, anything that gives a lot of clinical terms sometimes just does not work for a lot of populations who aren't in the field like we are. We know all these words, we know what they mean, but most of our clients don't. So there's no need for us to pose help in such a way that will turn them away from it because they don't understand what we're saying. So that could be like, you know, I mean, that is a problem I've seen in how we deal with a lot of trauma cases and a lot of situations that come into the Latinx community.
You know, that's really an interesting, you kind of turned the whole thing around, which is how we as clinicians are presenting to potential to clients in the sense of, can we accidentally inflict shame? Like me, even as a mom, it's like, I didn't cause trauma to my child. What are you saying? And then all of a sudden now I'm trying to get help for my kid, and now it's my fault because my kid has trauma. So that's a really interesting take. Anyone want to talk on that some?
Definitely. I also think that it has to do, okay, so I'll take it back from the referral. I'm just doing very in vivo personal experiences too. When we get those cases, especially with the Latinos, and I deal with them a lot. So, you know, it's making that phone call. I always try to also teach and train our staff to show that empathy and come from an area of like non-biased, non-judgmental, that, you know, oh, your child, like, but they're traumatized, like Mara says. So we're using all these key terms or clinical words that for the parents, you know, it's traumatic for them to hear that their children are, you know, being traumatized. So we don't want to minimize the situation. That's not what I'm saying here either. What I am saying is have a conversation. Like, you know, how is your child being affected by this? And speak to them in their language. I always ask, does the client speak English, or do they, you know, prefer to speak Spanish? And those phone calls, a lot of the times how I warm up to the clients is just showing that empathy, that, you know, I can relate to the situation of what's going on, kind of create more insight for the parents as well of, you know, do you really see what's going on? I can't believe that, you know, this happened. I can't imagine, you know, all the fears that you're experiencing, your child. I mean, this is something so, you know, so difficult for you to process. So with that essence, I think that it captivates the parents. They might not, we're breaking down the stigmas again, like Lindsay said, about mental health, you know, normalizing the situation in the sense that we're not here, you know, your child is not mentally ill, but they're experiencing situations that are affecting them right now. And, you know, we just want to meet this person. We want to like see where we can, you know, provide additional support. And again, you know, that empathy that goes along with someone that has experienced a traumatic incident, especially with the Latino population.
Yeah.
So it is 12:49. We only have 10 minutes left. What I want to talk about is actionable items for those watching in terms of, number one, being aware of our own lens. I've heard all of you at one point or another in this conversation say, you know, I had to make a list of where, you know, what my belief system is, or I had to like check myself here, or I had to rephrase, you know, how I was speaking with this client. Give us kind of a clear guide as to how to start looking at our own lens and actionable items for us to begin to change the way we're approaching diversity in our clinical practice. Who wants to take that?
I think that we just need to be respectful. Be respectful of others. Be respectful of what we believe, and that it's okay to have our own beliefs, and that we may not agree with what our client believes, but that doesn't mean that we can't help them if we just operate out of respect and understanding that whatever their backgrounds are, wherever they come from, their socioeconomic levels, you know, that it's just where they come from, that forms who they are as a person, and to appreciate the differences in someone. That it's not, that we don't have to be racist or discriminate, that it's okay to be different. And just because you had this experience, I didn't have that experience, but let's talk about it and give them a safe place to process what it is that they're dealing with.
Okay, so I hear you on an attitude of respect. We come into the clinical space with an attitude of respect, an attitude of openness. What about other things we've mentioned, like making a list? What about bouncing some, you know, of our checks with a fellow colleague? Can you talk on some of those things? They seem like they would be really powerful things to do in light of wanting to create an open space.
Yeah, so there's a ton of, how do I say, resources online for clinicians specifically built that are, it's like a personality test, like check your bias, right? And so it goes through a series of questions, a series of scenarios, situations that you've never thought of because you're not in that space, right? But you might be at some point as a clinician, and we're looking at different people. And so taking some of those, like when we're talking about a list or a checklist, like it's exhaustive, right? We don't know how many things we have to put on there. But going through and looking up some resources it's all about research and how to better yourself. So looking up for these resources, taking these kind of hidden bias, you know, personality tests that kind of tell you like, hey, actually, like you clicked all of these stereotypes about queer people here. Like you should probably look into that. You should probably do some research, educate yourself. Because a lot of times we don't even think about some of these marginalized groups because we don't deal with them firsthand, right? Or we're not part of that marginalized group. And so there are, I just looked one up right now that I've done before. It's learningforjustice.org. And they have like a really great comprehensive kind of test yourself quiz on there that you can look at. And it's just the beginning, right? It's all about educating yourself, reading about the cultures your clients come from, making sure that you have, like Allison said, an open mind when you're talking with them, that even though those biases and those prejudices are there because you're not a saint, they're there, right? No matter sometimes how much work we put into them, they're built into us sometimes. Being able to walk into that conversation, leaving those at the door, right? Checking them at the door so that you can provide the best relationship and the most help that you can. But as far as like a list or something goes, like there's tons of resources online.
And I think we can formulate it just by being here today. That was step one, coming in here and being open to this discussion and wanting to learn more about it. And if we want to do a 1, 2, 3 kind of checklist, we start off with, let's be open about the topic. Number 1. Number 2, let's learn about ourselves and where we're coming from. You know, number 3, let's educate ourselves. Let's go find these resources, you know, and number 4, let's get more involved in these conversations. And that right there is an opening segue to, you know, learning more about this.
Okay, with only 5 minutes left, let's talk therapy for just a second. Let's talk about, and again, I mentioned this to you in terms of talking about therapy approach. It's almost like I don't want to say, okay, so for people of color, we do this therapy, and for the queer community, we do this therapy. So when I'm saying therapeutic approaches, I'm kind of wanting your perspective as you have been, dealing with different diverse clientele. So can you guys talk about that in a much more productive way than me trying to parse that off?
I will definitely say that we gotta tame our egos. We really do. I think it's ego based sometimes, regardless
A lot
of
of
how
times.
we see situations. The counter transferences, I know we've heard that term again, and what Allison mentioned about respect, it really goes a long way. Be respectful. I always say join the client's world, meet them where they are. It's so important to see, the world from their eyes. And the more we can relate to their environment, to their world, to what they're experiencing through their traumas, etc., that we could be more competent in our approach as clinicians, and that we roll with that resistance, because sometimes we're like, well, my client is resistant, but are they really? Who's the one that's really resistant? And I can share a lot of information about, there is no resistant client. There's a resistant therapist that we are just not where the clients are. So I'll just keep it very practical. Check your counter transfers, your prejudgments, and also be very respectful, and always set a safe environment for our clients, making sure that they feel safe. I always want to make sure that they have that cozy, that they walk in, that they are treated with respect. And I think that opens doors to many other things in the clinical environment.
Anyone else want to talk about therapy?
I think that we can just we'll have a client come in, and let's just say for the discussion, he's queer, but he's coming with an anxiety. Just because he's queer, we're not going to associate that the anxiety is coming because of that, So it's about the complexity of the issue, like understanding and learning about him, his anxiety be coming for a complete different reason altogether. It has nothing to do with where he stands whether he's queer or not. So it's understanding that. So what therapeutic intervention are we going to take? We're not going to because he's this, then we're going to put him in this box. No, let's see where this anxiety is stemming from. And it could be multiple different things, So the interventions that we use, they have to be definitely so customized on the person and what they're dealing with. So there isn't like a go-to, this person's this. And that's the first thing we need to do, is not put people in boxes.
It's such a fine line to walk, because here your client comes in and they are queer. So you have to take that into account, but then also realize the things that they're talking about may have nothing to do with the fact that they're queer, and my immediate go-to would be, okay, let's talk about being queer. And, I can see where that takes some real technique to be able to parse all of that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. And that's what we need to kind of understand, is if they're coming here, let's first have that discussion. Let's see where the client is coming from and stemming up. And right there is that pre-notion that we're like, oh, that's probably why he's here. So it's understanding our client, understanding who we're dealing with, and just being open to seeing them in a different way.
Yeah, that's true. Because I was going to say, being judgmental, kind of jumping off of what Christian said and what Lindsay is saying, not being judgmental. That's the word that came to my mind. Like, as soon as you're judgmental, then you have messed it up for yourself. Like, you can't even get past it to see the root cause of what they're dealing with. So just like Lindsay said, just because they're queer doesn't mean that is the root cause of why they are seeing you. So we have to get past that judgmental phase or stage and just be open and let them process whatever it is.
Correct.
And then as a clinician, we begin to pick out, okay, what they may be dealing with. We ask questions. So you could use all kinds of theories and practices, but just make them feel comfortable.
Okay, so it is 12:59. We have I feel like we have done a really good job in kind of beginning the conversation. I want to thank all of you. This was really a great topic, a great conversation. I even called Mar this morning. I was like, Mar, I'm a little nervous about broaching this, make me feel better. And she did. So I honestly, thank you everyone for joining in the conversation. And again, be looking for your CE information by end of business tomorrow. I hope you all have an amazing day and an amazing weekend. We'll see you next time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.